If you're a real cowboy, prove it on my stallion, the widow said. 25 men tried, 25 men failed, but when a quiet stranger arrived in town, he didn't just ride the horse. He uncovered a murder that someone was willing to kill to keep hidden. The horse no man could ride. The town of Red Hollow sat quiet under the blazing Texas sun. Dust rolled slowly through the empty street, and the wooden saloon doors creaked with every passing breeze. It was the kind of town where stories lived longer than people. And for the past 6 months, only one story had been on everyone's lips. The story of Clara Whitmore and her stallion. Clara Whitmore was not just another widow. She was the widow of Samuel Whitmore, the richest rancher in the region. Samuel had owned thousands of acres of land, hundreds of cattle, and the most powerful horse anyone had ever seen. The stallion was called Midnight Thunder. Black as storm clouds and strong enough to break iron reins, Midnight Thunder had been Samuel's pride. Some said the horse understood every word Samuel spoke. But after Samuel Whitmore died in a mysterious accident, the horse changed. It became wild, untouchable, dangerous, and Clara Whitmore made a decision that shocked the entire county. Standing in the center of Red Hollow one morning, dressed in black with a calm expression, she made an announcement that spread like wildfire. "If any man in this county thinks he's a real cowboy," she said firmly, "then prove it." The crowd leaned closer. Clara pointed toward the distant Whitmore ranch. "Ride my stallion." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Clara continued, "Ride Midnight Thunder across my ranch and back, and I will marry that man." The town erupted. Some laughed, some whistled, others stared in disbelief. But Clara wasn't finished. 25 men have already tried," she said coldly. 25 men failed. And she walked away without another word. The legend begins. The challenge quickly became the most talked about event in 3 states. Cowboys came from everywhere: Arizona, New Mexico, Kansas. Men who had broken hundreds of horses believed they could handle Midnight Thunder. But the horse was different. The first cowboy lasted 3 seconds before being thrown into the dirt. The second cowboy was kicked so hard he broke 2 ribs. The third man never even got onto the saddle. Midnight Thunder knocked him unconscious before he could try. After 10 failures, the ranch hands began warning people. "That horse ain't normal." After 15 failures, people started whispering something else. "That horse knows Samuel Whitmore is dead." After 25 failures, nobody laughed anymore. The challenge became something else entirely. A test no man could pass. And Clara Whitmore never changed her expression. She simply watched, waiting. The cowboy who didn't care. One quiet afternoon, a stranger rode into Red Hollow. His horse was tired, his clothes were dusty, and unlike the flashy cowboys who had come before him, he looked like a man who had spent his life working rather than bragging. His name was Ethan Cole. Nobody noticed him at first. He tied his horse outside the saloon and walked inside slowly. The bartender nodded. "What'll it be?" "Water," Ethan replied. The room went silent. A cowboy drinking water in a saloon always drew attention. One man laughed. "You lost, friend." Ethan calmly drank his water. "No." Another man leaned forward. "You here for the widow?" Ethan looked up. "The widow." The room burst into laughter. "You don't know." The bartender wiped a glass and shook his head. "Friend, if you don't know about the widow's challenge, you must have been living under a rock." He pointed outside. "That ranch outside town belongs to Clara Whitmore." Ethan nodded, slowly. "So?" The bartender smiled. "She's offering marriage, land, and a fortune." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's the catch?" The entire room spoke at once. "You gotta ride Midnight Thunder." The laughter grew louder. Ethan said nothing. The bartender leaned closer. 25 men failed. Some got bones broken. Some nearly died. Ethan finished his water and stood up. "Where's the ranch?" The laughter stopped. The bartender stared at him. You serious? Ethan shrugged. Just asking. The bartender slowly pointed west. 3 miles. Big white barn. You can't miss it. Ethan nodded politely. Thank you. And he walked out. The widow watches. The sun was setting when Ethan Cole arrived at Whitmore Ranch. The land stretched endlessly across the horizon. Cattle grazed quietly. Windmills creaked in the distance. But near the barn, a crowd had gathered. Word traveled fast in small towns. Another cowboy had come to try. Clara Whitmore stood near the fence. Dressed in black, calm, watching. Her ranch hand stood beside her, arms crossed. Inside the corral, Midnight Thunder paced like a storm trapped in flesh. The horse snorted violently. Its hooves slammed into the dirt. Its eyes burned with wild fury. Ethan stopped at the gate. One of the ranch hands stepped forward. You here for the challenge? Ethan nodded. Maybe. The man laughed. Maybe. Ethan looked at the horse. Up close, Midnight Thunder looked even more powerful. Muscles moved beneath its black coat like waves. This was not just a horse. It was a force of nature. Clara Whitmore finally spoke. You understand the rules? Ethan turned toward her. Yes, ma'am. You ride him across the ranch, she said calmly. Reach the canyon ridge and return. If you fall, you lose. And if I succeed? Ethan asked. The crowd leaned closer. Clara looked him directly in the eyes. You marry me. The ranch hand smirked. No one expected this quiet stranger to last 10 seconds. But Ethan Cole simply nodded. Fair enough. Clara raised one eyebrow. You still want to try? Ethan stepped toward the gate. Yes. And for the first time in months. Clara Whitmore looked curious. The first ride. The crowd gathered closer around the corral fence. Dust floated in the golden light of the setting sun, and the air felt tense, as if the entire ranch was holding its breath. Inside the corral, Midnight Thunder slammed his hooves against the ground. The stallion's powerful muscles flexed beneath his black coat. His eyes were wild, burning with anger and something deeper, something almost like grief. 25 cowboys had tried to ride him. 25 had failed, and now a quiet stranger named Ethan Cole stood at the gate. The ranch hands watched him carefully. One of them, a tall man with a gray beard named Hank, shook his head. You don't look like the type chasing fortune or marriage, Hank said. Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe I'm not. Another ranch hand laughed. Then why risk getting killed? Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he kept his eyes on the horse. Midnight Thunder suddenly stopped pacing. The stallion stared directly at Ethan. For a moment, everything went quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop. The horse snorted loudly and struck the ground with his hoof. The crowd murmured nervously. That horse knows trouble, someone whispered. Clara Whitmore stood beside the fence, her arms crossed. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes watched Ethan closely. Most men who came here were loud and confident. They bragged. They laughed. They tried to impress her. But this man was different. He looked at Midnight Thunder the way a rancher looks at the sky before a storm, careful, thoughtful, respectful. Clara spoke. You may enter when you're ready. Ethan nodded once. He stepped through the gate. Face with the storm. The moment Ethan entered the corral, Midnight Thunder reared up violently. The crowd gasped. The horse's front hooves sliced through the air before crashing down into the dirt. Dust exploded around him. Ethan didn't move. He simply stood there, watching, waiting. Another cowboy in the crowd whispered, "He's already dead." But Ethan slowly took one step forward. Midnight Thunder snorted again and shook his head violently. The reins attached to the post rattled loudly. The stallion kicked the wooden fence, sending splinters flying. Ethan stopped a few feet away. Most men would have rushed the horse, tried to grab the saddle, tried to dominate him, but Ethan did something no one expected. He spoke softly. "Easy, boy." The horse's ears twitched. The crowd leaned forward. Did he just talk to the horse? Someone muttered. Ethan kept his voice calm. "You've had enough fools trying to ride you." Midnight Thunder stomped again, but this time, he didn't charge. Clara Whitmore noticed the change immediately. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Ethan slowly reached into his pocket. The ranch hands tensed, but he simply pulled out something small. An apple. He held it out in his palm. "Come on," he murmured. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The horse snorted again and turned his head. The crowd laughed. "See, told you." But then something unexpected happened. Midnight Thunder took one slow step forward. Then another. The laughter stopped. The horse lowered his head slightly, sniffing the air. Ethan didn't move. Finally, Midnight Thunder stretched his neck and grabbed the apple from Ethan's hand. The crowd gasped. Hank whispered, "Well, I'll be damned." Clara Whitmore's calm expression cracked for the first time. The saddle. After finishing the apple, Midnight Thunder stepped back again. The horse still looked powerful and dangerous, but something had changed. The rage in his eyes softened just a little. Ethan slowly reached for the saddle hanging on the fence. The ranch hands watched closely. "This is where he dies," someone whispered. But Ethan moved slowly, carefully, respectfully. He approached the stallion's side. Midnight Thunder tensed. The muscles along his body tightened like steel ropes. Ethan gently placed the saddle on the horse's back. The stallion snorted loudly but didn't explode into fury like before. The crowd couldn't believe it. 25 men tried that, Hank muttered. And none got that far. Ethan tightened the saddle straps. Then he placed his foot into the stirrup. Midnight Thunder instantly reared again. The horse kicked violently, trying to throw him away before he even climbed on. But Ethan held tight. With one powerful motion, he swung onto the saddle. The entire crowd shouted. He did it, but the real fight had just begun. The wild ride. The moment Ethan sat on the saddle, Midnight Thunder exploded. The stallion bucked like a raging tornado. His powerful body twisted and jumped violently. Dust clouds filled the corral. The horse spun in circles, kicked, and leapt into the air. Every movement tried to throw Ethan to the ground, and most riders would have fallen within seconds. But Ethan held on, not by force, but by balance. He leaned with the horse's movements. His hands stayed calm on the reins. His voice stayed low. "Easy, easy." Midnight Thunder bucked even harder. The stallion jumped high and crashed back down. The saddle creaked loudly. The crowd shouted in disbelief. 10 seconds. 15. 20. No rider had lasted this long. Clara Whitmore stared intensely. Her heart began beating faster. The horse charged across the corral, slamming against the fence before spinning again. But Ethan still held on. Finally, after nearly a full minute, Midnight Thunder slowed slightly. Not completely calm, but no longer trying to kill his rider. The entire ranch fell silent. Ethan slowly turned the horse toward the open gate. Clara Whitmore raised her hand. The ranch hands opened it. Beyond the gate stretched miles of ranch land, fields, hills, and far away in the distance, the canyon ridge, the finish line. Ethan looked at Clara. "Guess I'll take a ride." Clara said nothing. She simply watched. Ethan gently tapped the horse's side. Midnight Thunder shot forward like lightning. The crowd erupted. Dust exploded behind them as horse and rider raced across the open land. But no one noticed something strange. As Clara watched Ethan ride away, her expression changed, not with hope, not with excitement, but with worry, because hidden in the canyon hills, someone else was watching, and they were holding a rifle. Shadows in the canyon. Midnight Thunder raced across the open land like a black storm. The powerful stallion's hooves thundered against the dry earth as dust clouds exploded behind him. The wind roared past Ethan Cole's ears, whipping his hat back as the ranch stretched endlessly in front of him. Behind him, the crowd at Whitmore Ranch slowly disappeared into the distance. But Ethan didn't slow down. He leaned forward slightly, allowing the horse to run. Not fighting him, not forcing him, just riding with him. Midnight Thunder seemed to understand. For the first time since Samuel Whitmore's death, the stallion was running with a rider who wasn't trying to break him. And slowly, the horse stopped fighting. His powerful strides became smoother, stronger, faster. Ethan whispered quietly as the wind rushed past. "Good boy, let's stretch those legs." The stallion snorted but kept running. Far behind them, Clara Whitmore stood beside the ranch fence, watching the horizon. Dust clouds showed Ethan's path across the land. Most riders had been thrown before reaching the first hill. But Ethan was already halfway to the canyon ridge. The ranch hands stared in disbelief. Hank shook his head slowly. That man might actually do it. Another ranch hand frowned. Then the widow's getting married. But Clara Whitmore didn't smile. Her eyes stayed fixed on the distant canyon. Because she knew something the others didn't. Someone had been watching the challenge for weeks. Someone who didn't want any cowboy to succeed. The man in the hills. High above the canyon ridge, hidden behind jagged rocks, a man lay flat against the ground. His rifle rested carefully on the edge of a stone. Through the scope, he watched the black stallion racing toward the ridge. The man's face was rough and weathered. A scar ran across his cheek. His name was Victor Kane. Once, he had been Samuel Whitmore's right-hand man, the ranch foreman. But after Samuel died, Victor had disappeared. Most people thought he had simply left town. But that wasn't true. Victor Kane had never left. He had been hiding, watching, waiting. Through the rifle scope, he followed Ethan's movement. The cowboy was riding better than anyone before him. Victor frowned. That ain't supposed to happen. He adjusted the rifle slightly. If Ethan reached the ridge and returned, the challenge would be over. Clara Whitmore would have a husband. And that meant someone new would control Whitmore Ranch. Victor Kane couldn't allow that. He whispered under his breath, "Sorry, cowboy," and his finger moved slowly toward the trigger. Midnight Thunder remembers. Back on the open field, Ethan guided Midnight Thunder toward the canyon trail. The stallion's powerful breathing echoed through the quiet hills. The ground became rougher as rocks appeared along the narrow path leading upward. The canyon ridge stood tall ahead, a long cliff overlooking the valley. If Ethan reached the top and returned, the challenge would be complete. But something changed. Suddenly Midnight Thunder slowed, then stopped completely. Ethan frowned. "What is it, boy?" The stallion's ears turned sharply toward the rocky cliffs. His body stiffened. Then he snorted loudly. A warning. Ethan looked around. The land was quiet. Too quiet. No birds. No wind. Just silence. Midnight Thunder stomped the ground nervously. Ethan gently patted his neck. "You hear something?" The stallion snorted again and turned his head toward the canyon rocks. Then Ethan noticed something strange. A tiny flash of sunlight. Metal reflecting light. High above them, Ethan's eyes narrowed. Rifle. In that same second, a gunshot exploded through the canyon. Bang! The bullet slammed into the dirt just inches from Midnight Thunder's hooves. The stallion reared violently, screaming in fear. Ethan held tight as the horse nearly threw him. "Easy." Another gunshot echoed. Bang! The bullet struck a rock beside Ethan, sending stone fragments flying. Midnight Thunder panicked and bolted down the canyon trail. The powerful horse ran wildly, desperate to escape the danger. Ethan ducked low over the saddle. "Someone's shooting at us." High above, Victor Kane cursed under his breath. The first shot missed. The second missed. Now the horse was running too fast. Victor fired again. Bang! But the bullet struck a tree branch instead. Midnight Thunder disappeared into the canyon valley below. Victor slammed his fist against the ground. Damn it! A dangerous truth. Miles away, Ethan finally managed to slow the terrified stallion near a small creek. The horse's chest heaved as he breathed heavily. Ethan slid off the saddle slowly. "You're all right. Easy now." Midnight Thunder paced nervously but stayed near him. Ethan looked back toward the canyon ridge. Someone had tried to kill him. That meant the challenge wasn't just a test of riding. Something darker was happening. He splashed water onto his face from the creek. Then he froze. Hoofprints. Fresh ones. But not from Midnight Thunder. Another horse had been here recently. Someone else had been moving through the canyon. Ethan stood quietly, thinking. Then something else caught his eye. Near the creek bank, half buried in the dirt, was a metal object. He picked it up. A silver pocket watch, engraved with initials, SW. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. Samuel Whitmore. This watch belonged to the dead rancher. But what was it doing here? Ethan turned it over slowly. The back of the watch had something scratched into it. 3 words. Kane knows. Ethan looked back toward the canyon. Victor Kane. Suddenly, the story of Samuel Whitmore's death didn't seem like an accident anymore. And someone was willing to kill to keep the truth buried. Behind him, Midnight Thunder snorted quietly, as if the horse already knew. Ethan slipped the watch into his pocket and climbed back onto the saddle. He turned the horse toward Whitmore Ranch. Because now he wasn't just riding to win a challenge. He was riding back with the truth. And someone at the ranch was about to be exposed. The truth returns to the ranch. The sun was beginning to sink behind the hills when Ethan Cole rode back toward Whitmore Ranch. Dust followed Midnight Thunder as the powerful stallion ran across the wide fields. But this time the horse wasn't fighting. He was running calmly, almost proudly. As the ranch buildings came into view, the crowd near the corral began shouting. "Someone's coming back. Look, it's the Black Stallion." Within seconds everyone rushed toward the fence. Hank shaded his eyes and leaned forward. "Well, I'll be, that's him." Midnight Thunder galloped through the open gate and slowed to a stop near the corral. Ethan gently pulled the reins and the stallion halted. For a moment, nobody spoke. The crowd stared in disbelief. The impossible had happened. A man had ridden Midnight Thunder to the canyon and back. Then suddenly the ranch exploded with noise. Cheers erupted. Some men whistled. Others clapped. He did it. The stranger won. Hank laughed loudly and slapped another ranch hand on the shoulder. "I told you he might actually do it." But Clara Whitmore didn't celebrate. She walked slowly toward Ethan. Her black dress moved gently in the evening wind. Her eyes studied him carefully. Ethan climbed down from the saddle. Midnight Thunder stood calmly beside him, breathing heavily but relaxed. Clara stopped a few feet away. "You reached the canyon ridge?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "And you returned without falling?" "Yes." Clara looked at the horse. Midnight Thunder lowered his head slightly beside Ethan. For the first time since Samuel Whitmore died, the stallion looked peaceful. The crowd waited. Everyone knew the rule. If a man succeeded, Clara Whitmore would marry him. Hank grinned. "Well, ma'am, looks like you've got yourself a husband." Some men laughed, but Ethan raised his hand. "Not so fast." The laughter stopped. Clara frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Ethan reached into his pocket slowly. "I think there's something you should see first." He pulled out the silver pocket watch. Clara's eyes widened the moment she saw it. "That's..." "Yes," Ethan said. "Samuel Whitmore's watch." The crowd murmured in confusion. Clara stepped closer. "Where did you find it?" Ethan looked toward the distant canyon. "Near the creek below the ridge." Clara's face turned pale. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Samuel died near the old barn." "That's what everyone believes," Ethan replied. Then he turned the watch over. "But there's something else." Clara read the scratched words on the back. "Kane knows." Her expression changed instantly. Fear, anger, realization. Hank looked confused. "Kane," he said. "You mean Victor Kane?" The ranch hands exchanged uneasy looks. Victor Kane had been Samuel Whitmore's foreman for years. Strong, reliable, trusted. But after Samuel's death, He vanished without explanation. Ethan nodded slowly. I believe Samuel Whitmore didn't die in an accident. The entire ranch fell silent. Ethan continued. Someone tried to kill me in the canyon today. Gasps spread through the crowd. A rifle shot. From the cliffs. Hank's jaw tightened. You saying Kane did that? Ethan nodded. And I think he killed Samuel too. The widow's secret. Clara Whitmore turned away for a moment. Her hands trembled slightly. Ethan noticed. You already suspected it, he said quietly. Clara slowly faced him again. Yes. The crowd murmured again. I never believed Samuel's death was an accident, she admitted. That's why I created the challenge. Hank blinked in confusion. The challenge? Clara nodded. Victor Kane wanted control of the ranch. He knew if I remarried, he'd lose his chance to take everything. The ranch hands slowly began to understand. So you were waiting, Hank said. For a man strong enough to survive, Clara finished. A man Kane would try to stop. Ethan crossed his arms. So the challenge wasn't really about the horse. Clara shook her head. No, it was bait. The crowd whispered nervously. Ethan looked toward the darkening hills. Well, it worked. Just then, a distant gunshot echoed across the ranch. Bang! The bullet slammed into a wooden post beside the corral. People screamed and ducked. Horses panicked. Another gunshot echoed. Bang! A lantern shattered beside the barn. Hank shouted, Everyone get down. Clara's face hardened. He's here. The final showdown begins. High on a nearby ridge overlooking the ranch, Victor Kane sat on his horse. The rifle rested across his saddle. His face was dark with anger. That cowboy should have died in the canyon. He aimed the rifle again. Through the scope, he saw Ethan standing beside Clara Whitmore. Victor's finger tightened on the trigger. If that cowboy marries her, I lose everything. He aimed carefully at Ethan's chest. But before he could fire, midnight thunder suddenly reared violently in the corral. The stallion screamed and kicked the gate open. The horse charged straight toward the ridge. Victor Kane looked up in surprise. The powerful black stallion thundered across the field like a hurricane. Victor cursed. What the? And behind the stallion, Ethan Cole jumped onto another horse. He turned toward the hills. Hank shouted after him, Where are you going? Ethan didn't stop. To finish this, dust exploded as he galloped after midnight thunder. Up toward the ridge, up toward Victor Kane, up toward the truth, and in the fading light of sunset, the final fight for Whitmore Ranch was about to begin. The last ride. The sky above Whitmore Ranch burned orange as the sun disappeared behind the hills. Dust storms followed two racing horses. One rider was chasing the other. And between them ran the most feared horse in the county, Midnight Thunder. The black stallion raced ahead like a shadow flying across the land. Behind him, Ethan Cole leaned forward on his horse, urging it faster. And high on the rocky ridge above the ranch waited Victor Kane. The man who had been hiding in the shadows. The man who had tried to kill Ethan in the canyon. And the man who knew the truth about Samuel Whitmore's death. The hunter becomes the hunted. Victor Kane saw the riders coming. First the black stallion, then Ethan behind him. Victor narrowed his eyes. That cowboy just won't quit. He raised his rifle and aimed again. But Midnight Thunder suddenly veered off the trail, racing straight toward Victor's position. Victor frowned. What's that horse doing? The stallion galloped straight up the rocky hill, climbing faster than any horse should. Victor tried to aim again. But Ethan was getting closer. Victor fired. Bang! The bullet whistled past Ethan's shoulder and struck a rock. Ethan didn't slow down. Victor fired again. Bang! This time the bullet struck Ethan's saddle. The horse beneath Ethan panicked slightly, but Ethan kept control. Not today, Ethan muttered. He pushed the horse harder up the hill. Victor cursed. The cowboy was too close now. Rifles were useless at this distance. Victor threw the gun aside and pulled out his revolver. Midnight Thunder's choice. Before Ethan could reach the ridge, Midnight Thunder arrived first. The stallion charged toward Victor Kane with wild fury. Victor stepped back in shock. What the? The horse reared violently, hooves slashing through the air. Victor barely dodged the strike. You crazy beast! Victor fired his revolver. Bang! But the bullet missed. Midnight Thunder kicked the ground and charged again. The stallion seemed to remember this man. Remember the danger. Remember the past. Victor stumbled backward. Then Ethan finally reached the ridge. He jumped off his horse and stepped forward calmly. It's over, Kane. Victor laughed coldly. You think you understand what's happening here? Ethan's eyes stayed steady. I know you killed Samuel Whitmore. Victor's smile slowly faded. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Victor sighed. Well, he said quietly, I suppose the truth was bound to come out eventually. The truth about Samuel Whitmore. The wind howled softly across the ridge. Victor lowered the revolver slightly. You want the truth, he said. Ethan nodded. Victor looked out across Whitmore Ranch. I worked that land for 20 years, he said. I built that ranch with Samuel Whitmore. I ran the cattle. I broke the horses. I fought off rustlers. His voice grew bitter. And what did I get? Nothing. Samuel kept the money, the land, the power. Victor clenched his jaw. So one night, I told him the ranch should be half mine. And what did he do? Victor laughed darkly. He laughed in my face. Midnight Thunder snorted angrily nearby. Victor looked at the stallion. That horse saw everything. Ethan spoke quietly. So you killed him? Victor nodded slowly. Yes. He fell near the canyon when we fought. I pushed him over the rocks. The wind carried his words across the hills. But the horse saw it all, Victor continued. After that day, Midnight Thunder never trusted another rider. Ethan looked at the stallion. The horse stood beside him now. Calm, protective. Victor raised the revolver again. And now you know too much. The final fight. Victor fired. Bang. But Ethan moved faster. He dove to the side as the bullet struck the dirt. Ethan tackled Victor hard, knocking the gun from his hand. Both men rolled across the rocky ground, fists flying. Victor was bigger, stronger, but Ethan was faster. Victor swung wildly and struck Ethan across the jaw. Ethan staggered but stayed on his feet. Victor lunged again, but suddenly Midnight Thunder charged forward. The stallion slammed into Victor from the side, knocking him violently to the ground. Victor groaned in pain. The revolver rolled across the rocks. Ethan grabbed it first. He pointed it directly at Victor Kane. It's over. Victor lay on the ground, breathing heavily. For a moment, the only sound was the wind and the stallion's heavy breathing. Then Victor slowly raised his hands. Justice at Whitmore Ranch. An hour later, lanterns glowed across Whitmore Ranch. The ranch hands gathered around as Ethan rode back slowly. Victor Kane sat tied to a horse behind him. The moment the ranch hands saw him, angry voices rose. That's him, Hank. That's Kane. Clara Whitmore stepped forward slowly. Her eyes locked on Victor. You killed my husband. Victor didn't respond. Hank grabbed Victor roughly and pulled him down from the horse. We'll take him to the sheriff in the morning. Victor was dragged away, and finally the ranch grew quiet again. The widow's decision. The moon rose above Whitmore Ranch. Clara Whitmore stood near the fence where the challenge had begun. Ethan walked toward her. Midnight Thunder followed calmly behind him. The stallion now trusted him completely. Clara looked at Ethan thoughtfully. You finished the ride, she said softly. Ethan nodded. And you brought the truth back with you. For a moment neither spoke. Then Clara smiled faintly. You know the rules. Ethan raised an eyebrow. About the marriage, yes. Ethan looked at the wide ranch land stretching into the distance. Then he chuckled quietly. You know something. What? I came here just looking for water. Clara laughed softly for the first time in months. Midnight Thunder snorted beside them. Ethan gently patted the horse's neck. Well, he said, smiling slightly, Looks like I found a lot more than that. The wind rolled across the quiet ranch, and under the moonlight of the Wild West, a lonely cowboy, a fearless widow, and the most powerful stallion in the land began a new story together. Please friends spot my channel, subscribe for more stories. Thanks for watching.